Hi everyone! With The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom coming out in the next couple months, I wanted to make a video compiling 5 things that I'd like to see in the Breath of the Wild sequel. Some of these things are definitely common opinions in the Zelda community, but I think some of them may be unpopular. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I just started my channel, but for now I want to focus on Zelda content leading up to a big playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom once it comes out. Let's get started. The first thing I want to see in Tears of the Kingdom is more unique bosses and mini-bosses. I haven't seen this brought up that much, so I'm not sure if it's an unpopular opinion, but I loved the bosses of prior games and the fact that they didn't focus mainly on combat. I loved that I didn't have to be someone who learned all of the combat moves and mastered them to be able to enjoy the fights. Prior to Breath of the Wild, Zelda games typically featured bosses at the end of dungeons that tested a mix of your puzzle skills and your combat skills. The bosses were almost puzzles themselves, as you would have to find their weak point, usually assisted by an item from the dungeon that you just defeated, and then destroy them by exploiting that weakness. Bosses in Breath of the Wild mostly just tested your knowledge of the game's combat system. Even if a boss had a weak spot, you weren't typically required to exploit it, as you also had the freedom to destroy them however you wanted to. I do see the appeal of this, and surely many players preferred this system to the older system. Previous Zelda games were more formulaic and didn't allow for that same freedom. However, as someone who loves the Zelda series mainly because there's typically more of an emphasis on puzzles and problem solving than combat, this aspect of Breath of the Wild was disappointing for me. In my opinion, there's plenty of games out there with an emphasis on combat, but what made the Zelda series unique and fun for me was it being different than the norm. I'm fine with Tears of the Kingdom allowing the player more freedom than older Zelda games did to defeat bosses how they want to, but I would love at least some of the bosses in the game to either require or strongly encourage taking down bosses by figuring out their weak spot and exploiting it. The next thing I hope Tears of the Kingdom has is better dungeons. I know, this is a popular opinion, and nearly everyone I've talked to believes that Breath of the Wild shrines and divine beasts were extremely weak compared to the Zelda games of the past. A lot of people point to the ease with which most shrines and divine beasts are completed as a negative, and I have to agree. But for me, this wasn't the biggest deal in the world. I don't play Zelda games because they're always difficult, because let's be honest, they're usually not. I play them because they're fun, and they immerse you in a world that you wish you could explore in real life. There's usually unique themes for each dungeon in a Zelda game. Even though in a lot of previous games the themes were similar, for instance there's usually an Earth Temple, Fire Temple, and Desert Temple, they always created a great and new experience with each game. The Earth Temple in Ocarina of Time is not the same as the one in Wind Waker, and neither are the same as the one in Skyward Sword. They all have different takes on these, and there are also some that are completely different and new. One of my favorite dungeons of the entire series was from Twilight Princess, Snow Peak Ruins. This dungeon is a fan favorite, so Zelda veterans will know why this dungeon is so great. When I first played the game, it took me some time to even realize I was in a dungeon at all. Snow Peak Ruins is a mansion and home to 2 Yeti. You're tasked with finding a mirror shard within the mansion, and one of the Yeti gives you directions to where the shard is hidden. However, every time you get to the place she marked on your map, you open a chest that gives you a piece of food instead of the mirror shard that you're looking for. You give the food to the other Yeti, who adds them to a soup you can collect in your bottle for more and more health. This dungeon ends with you fighting one of the Yeti possessed by the darkness in the mirror shard, and is an amazing example of how I want dungeons to be in Tears of the Kingdom. They don't have to be the most mind-blowing mechanically or even the most original. As long as they can be a new take on a fun theme, maybe even with a good story to back it, I'll be happy. Speaking of a good story, that's my next wish for Tears of the Kingdom. A better story than Breath of the Wild had, one where you're actively taking part in it. Experiencing the story through flashbacks was a novel idea for the series, and I enjoyed it in the context of that game. But I want something different for Tears of the Kingdom. My hope is that the actions the player is taking while playing the game will actually affect the present day. I want to get to a location, see a cutscene play out, have some relevant gameplay, and then maybe finish with another cutscene. I think this will help the story feel more fleshed out and interesting, and like what you're doing actually matters. I believe it'll help with immersion into the world as well, combined with better theming in certain areas like dungeons and temples, as I already discussed. The next point is actually something that the older Zelda games never got right, nor did Breath of the Wild. I would love for there to be new content after the final boss battle to continue playing. Yes, Zelda games have always let you continue playing on your save file after you finish the game. However, the game kinda acts like you never defeated the boss when you do this. For instance, if you defeat Ganon in Breath of the Wild and then continue playing on that save file, Hyrule Castle still has Ganon swirling around it. There are still guardians and enemies everywhere. The world is still destroyed and taken over. It's essentially like you never even beat the final boss at all. There's a level of unsatisfaction with this that has always bothered me in Zelda games. I would love that if after the final boss you were able to permanently clear out some previously monster-infested areas and have new side quests where you're able to rebuild destroyed towns. Breath of the Wild had the Terrytown side quest. Now we just need something like that after the endgame to permanently change the world and feel like Link is really making a difference. The last thing I hope Tears of the Kingdom includes is more traditional Zelda items that are obtainable throughout gameplay, not just at the beginning or the end of the game. Breath of the Wild had runes, which you obtained at the very start of the game, and light arrows, which are obtained at the very end and only useful in the final boss battle. The only other items you really get are the champion abilities, which aren't terrible, but also aren't super exciting. Ultimately, one of them is just an attack, one is essentially a supercharged fairy that revives you when you die, and one is a shield. These are all things that already exist in the game. Despite being different here, they just don't add a ton of unique gameplay. When I played the older Zelda games for the first time, walking into a new dungeon was beyond exciting as you racked your brain thinking about what item you might get. Will I get iron boots? Are there switches around here that I'm not heavy enough to press down? Will I get a hook shot? Are there targets on the walls anywhere? This was such a fun aspect of Zeldas of old that just doesn't exist in Breath of the Wild. I know the hookshot was originally planned to be in Breath of the Wild, but was removed before the game was released. I don't understand why, as they could have avoided breaking the climbing mechanic by just giving it late game when you already have a lot of stamina and Rivali's Gale anyway, or by limiting its use to specific targets like in the old games. Tears of the Kingdom could even use items to allow for more progression gating than Breath of the Wild had. As much as I like the open world, I do think that Tears of the Kingdom would benefit from a little more structure and progression gating. I personally would love it if most of the map was open, with some areas being either impossible or extremely difficult to get to without having a certain item or defeating a certain boss or dungeon beforehand. So those are 5 things I'm hoping to see in The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom when it's released in May. I know we're all a little nervous watching the trailers that Nintendo has released as of now, because they don't give much away. I do see some enemy variety, which I'm super excited about. But we still don't really have a great idea of how this game will, play out. I plan on recording my playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom when it comes out, so if you like this video or would like to see my reactions to playing the new game, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one.